What is that contrast of applying those controls inside the browser versus applying those controls at the network level or at a gateway?
Well, let's think about where it all started. We always made our architectural decisions based on how our users worked. So in the past, they were fixed use cases. They were pretty fixed in how they worked. You know, they came to the office behind a brick and mortar, and when they weren't, which was a small subset of our users, we created things like VPNs for those people. And it made a lot of sense. We would do things like backhaul the traffic for the user, or when they're on-prem, send them through a full stack. That architectural decision has been in place for many years, but yet the fundamentals of how users work and how applications are deployed, that's altered significantly. So it causes us to have to rethink, you know, how we assert ourselves. And there may be cases where asserting ourselves in the network still makes sense, but a lot of cases it's not possible. Or it may make sense where, you know, we may assert ourselves in a certain way on the endpoint, but again, in a lot of cases it's not possible. You think about contractors and others, you can't assert yourself in their endpoint. So that's where it begins to make sense to consider the possibilities of how the browser becomes a natural place of assertion. Because the browser lives where that user lives regardless. It's whether it's a user in an on-prem world and in a managed environment, or a user that is in an unmanaged environment. They're all living in that center of the universe, the epicenter of the browser window. So asserting control there makes a lot of sense where those other controls may not be able to assert themselves anyway.
One of the big motivations here is that our whole network topology has totally changed, right? Like you were saying, we don't have that network perimeter anymore where everyone's on the inside. So how does putting it in the browser help us solve that challenge specifically?
Well, I think you just called out one of the key things, first of all, is architecture. The entirety of the architectures we depended on before is transformed, it's changed. I should say, let me change that. Maybe the architecture remains, but yet the way the user works is different. So putting in the browser makes a lot of sense, because at that point, the reality is whether I'm dealing with a user who lives in a hybrid world where they're sometimes in the physical office, sometimes not, I'm dealing with a contractor on an unmanaged device or some sort of BYD scenario that's unmanaged, I still need to find a place to assert myself and do that in a lightweight way. But guess what? In every single one of those use cases, every single situation like that, those people depend on a browser every single day. Because again, as we talked about earlier, it's where that user, that app, the data all intersect. Why not put the power within the browser and then reduce the dependency on the old architecture that can no longer be effective in the first place? That is the new architecture. That's the new architecture about how people work. Why not instrument security in the same way?
One of the struggles, I think, when you look at this is putting controls at a distance. I'll use a physical analogy. If you think of your modern prison, your guards aren't sitting 300 yards away from the prison yard. They're in there with the inmates, they're above in guard towers, they're right there because you want control as close to your situation as possible. The same thing is true in cyber defense and digital defense. I want that control as close to the point of origination as possible. And so when you think about the network and the architectures we've used in the past, and you think about some of the changes that have been thrust upon us because of the pandemic or work from home or shifting working behaviors, the reality is not only are those controls now further away, they're actually less effective because all of those controls on the network require us to decrypt SSL, inspect the contents, and put it back together. And there isn't a single network security engineer in practice today that isn't looking at the future and saying the network is getting darker, it's getting harder to decrypt, protocols are changing, and it's all making the network less effective. So the time is more paramount than ever. We have to bring the control closer to the user. We've never had the control in the browser until Island. And so this is a remarkable opportunity for us to change the way security is delivered while maintaining the expectation of an amazing user experience.